Hey everyone, I want to make a quick video on the differences between blocking code or synchronous code versus asynchronous code or non-blocking code in JavaScript. In this file, I have two functions. I have one called run blocking demo and the other one called run non-blocking demo. Both of these functions are essentially going to do the same thing, and as you guys can see, the code looks very similar. However, both of these functions have a result variable, and for the blocking demo, we're going to be calling the block for seconds method. And for the async or non-blocking demo, we will be using the non-blocking method, as well as using both the await keyword and designating our function as async. So what are the two differences between these functions? Well, block for seconds is actually just going to continue execution and a while loop for n seconds, depending on what you pass in. And because JavaScript is single threaded, this will actually block the main thread. This will be important later. And then we have our next function called non-blocking, and this is in more of a function that is meant to be handled asynchronous, since it returns a promise that is set to resolve at n seconds, depending on what you pass in. So knowing that, what do you guys would think the consequence would be of calling run blocking demo? Reading the code, you would think the first thing that we would see is this log message app started first. You may expect us to wait another second before we get this log message. You may expect us to wait 5 seconds, and then ultimately we'll get the last log line. But knowing that JavaScript is single threaded, and this is an example of blocking or synchronous code, let's actually see what result we get. So let's uncomment the function call for run blocking demo. Let's run the file. We get the first log message, and we haven't gotten anything yet. Let's see what we get. And it seems like we got our first log message here, and then 5 seconds later, we actually got our two final log messages. And the result of setTimeout, we actually got at the end. We got it once the app had already finished. Now, this is weird. You would expect the setTimeout result to resolve after a second, because that's what we designated. However, we're not getting it until 5 seconds later. Well, the reason why this happened is because, like mentioned before, JavaScript is single-threaded, and when we have blocking code like this, block for seconds, we're actually blocking the main thread and the event loop. So even though setTimeout wants to dispatch this log call, it simply can't. The main thread is being blocked because this is an example of a synchronous procedure. And because of this, once we actually finish execution of block for seconds, we immediately log this final message, and then finally we can actually dispatch the result of setTimeout. And again, this is a consequence of blocking code, of code that is synchronous. And JavaScript is single-threaded, so you may think to yourself, well, how are we going to handle complex things like network calls and input-output, maybe database calls? Well, even though JavaScript is single-threaded, we can still write asynchronous code that honestly looks synchronous and is handled properly by use of the event loop. So instead of running run blocking demo, let's instead call run non-blocking demo. If we call this function, we'll see that we get our first log message. Immediately a second later, we get the result of setTimeout. And then 5 seconds after we've started, we get the last message. And this seems pretty consistent. If you read the terminal, this kind of reads out what you would expect from this async function. Now, what's the difference between these two functions? Like I said, the actual procedures themselves are the same. However, this function is an asynchronous function that uses the await keyword. And when we use the await keyword in an async function, we're essentially saying, hey, please pause here in this async function until the promise is resolved, but any other code or executions that need to fire, you're free to do so. So when we use the await keyword, we're essentially freeing up the event loop to take care of any other tasks, which is why we were able to see the result from setTimeout precisely 1 second later. Even though we were paused in this function or at line 24, the event loop is free to dispatch this log call, which is what we inevitably see in the terminal. That'll be all for this video. I appreciate everybody for sticking around. I'll leave a link in the description where you can find the code and run it for yourself. Have a great day, and goodbye.